Nebula Lockdown, Part 1, TheStep. He didn't know what to expect. Life had been different since he left the service behind. Gone was the structure, the regular pace of life that kept a person moving. But things had changed. The honor he'd been promised as a kid had been supplanted by politics and division. He couldn't stay there anymore, but he also didn't have a plan for when he got out. In the past, after a man like him, a man with contacts and access put in their time, employers would line up around the block. But those days were long gone. Now, if you left the service, you might as well have cut ties with one of the corporations. No one wanted to touch you at that point. It was probably better to be a felon these days. Not that the corps didn't run the governments too. But he'd made his choice, and there was nothing to do but find a way forward. And so, the meet. If he was being honest with himself, it wasn't even his idea. That would be Cassie who suggested it. Cassie knew he needed work, needed something to occupy his mind. He'd been trying to find honest work, but even though he'd left the service as a captain, the fact that he'd left wasn't working in his favor. He'd pieced together some day labor at work at a construction site, and Sal, the owner of the Black Tap, had wiped his tab one night after he bounced a couple of gangers who had had a bit too much to drink. At least he thought they were drunk, but the jobs were few and far between. As he stood in the light rain, looking across the street at the warehouse, drips fell from the end of his ball cap. Why was he hesitating? It wasn't the rain. As a Phoenix native, he drank in the rare precipitation and welcomed the furious gales that often accompanied it. The warehouse was a mere 100 meters away, but the thought of stepping off the curb made his mind skittish considering all the possibilities. Was it a setup? A lie? A gang initiation? He trusted Cassie, but he'd known her only 3 months. He was still skeptical that she haunted the Black Tap. The bar wasn't anything special, but it sure as hell beat the dives he frequented when on leave. But that's a different story. Cassie wasn't the type of girl that should be a regular at the Black Tap. She was gorgeous, even with the synthetics. All legs and curves like a supermodel, but not so tall that he couldn't rest his chin on her head when she had her shoes off. But her looks weren't what first drew his eye to her. She had been sitting in what would end up being their booth, and all he could see was her head when he entered the bar that night. Her mouse brown hair was wrapped around her head in a braid that reminded him of an actress in a movie his dad made him watch when he was a kid. Cassie always got annoyed when he reminded her of that, but she had a shimmer in her natural eye when he did, almost like she loved the comparison. After all, being compared to a warrior space princess wasn't a bad thing, was it? No, it was her synthetics that drew his attention. Her right eye shone like polished silver, a feature further illuminated when the lights in the bar reflected off it, giving the impression it was lit from the inside. And that's to say nothing of her arm. It had all the grace of an arm made of flesh and bone, but polished just like her eye. She had lost both in an accident 4 years ago, but the replacements were not the quality you would expect in a place like the Black Tap. If someone at the Black Tap could even afford replacements. He still wasn't sure how she supported herself. She changed the subject any time he asked, and disappeared for days at a time every so often. She wouldn't tell him where she was going, and he often didn't even know she'd left until she stopped answering his comms. She'd go dark until she quietly slipped into the booth across from him, picking up as if nothing had changed. At least until last night, when Cassie passed a chip across the booth to him. I hate to do this, but I'm leaving in a couple of hours, and I don't know when I'm returning. But while I'm gone, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take this job. Everything I can tell you is on this chip, and I was even able to get some money for you as an advance. It should cover you for at least the next 2 months. I'll come back, I hope. But until I do, this is the best I can offer. And with that, she stood, rounded the booth, and pulled his mouth to hers. Her kiss was passionate, but also tinged with a bit of what felt like sadness and fear. Not fear of him, but of never kissing him again. And then, before he could even kiss her back, she turned and practically ran out of the bar. Once his head had cleared, he tried calling her, but there was no answer. He had expected that. When he slotted the chip into his datapad, the screen suddenly went dark, and then almost immediately flashed to life. Strings of code ran across it, rolling by so fast he only caught occasional words or numbers, but nothing he could make sense of. He started to put the pad down when suddenly the code stopped. The screen cleared, and the main screen prompted as ready for use. Picking the pad up, he saw a new notification that he ignored, and moved to look at what was on the chip. The chip contained a single file, which in turn housed just 2 lines of text, the address of the warehouse, and a time, 5 minutes from now. Standing on the curb, the rain had finally begun to soak into the water-resistant old fatigue jacket he still wore, increasing the mugginess of the summer monsoon. He still wasn't sure what he was going to do, but what did he have to lose?